Please take your seats. Now, please welcome Ann Mosley, Aspen Institute Vice President and Founder and Executive Director of Ascend.
Hello, friends and family. Welcome to an afternoon of inspiration and big ideas, hosted and curated with love by Ascend at the Aspen Institute. Ascend is not just a program here at the Aspen Institute. It's a community that is collectively focused on fostering and accelerating an intergenerational cycle of economic mobility, educational success, and well-being for all children and families in our world, in our country, in Colorado, and here in the Roaring Fork Valley. All of our work is enveloped within a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and the power of lived experience and expertise. We're a community of 120 Ascend Fellows, 532 network partners, 45 of which are here from Colorado, 130 parent advisors, and a dedicated staff team of 25 rock stars. Together, we are serving and reaching and being inspired by more than 15 million families. Now, today is a day where we are having a new public program here at the Aspen Institute. And I want to recognize my colleague and boss, but Executive Vice President Elliot Gerson, who has for years and a long time curated and cared for so many of the programs we do here, from Ideas Festival to the National Security Forum. And he, like all of us, believe there's no larger or more important security issue than that of our families and our children. So the VisionXChange is about the power of vision to accelerate and amplify the change that our world, our families, and our country is desperately, urgently asking for and aching for. I'm thrilled that we have about 500 people joining us virtually from across the country. And we also are joined here with nearly 500 people, including about 200 friends from the Roaring Fork Valley who've made the effort to come join us in person. What we've come to do here at the VisionXChange, it's a gathering of dreamers and doers who are here and are doing every single day. They are changing hearts, minds, transforming policies, practices, not just what we do, but how we do it, and with whom. The themes that you will see shortly and that we've been working on and playing with over the past few days and will continue to do are around dreaming, disrupting, and delighting. Our dreams are fundamental to our humanity and our sense of purpose. And dreams are how we begin to vision and see, which we do not yet have. Disrupting is about changing the game, changing the paradigm. And for us, it's about redesigning systems of care, economic development, how capital flows, how we do governance and connect with one another. When we disrupt, we completely reject it can't be done, or we don't have the resources. Because in fact, we have the will and we have the way. It's now time to do that. And as we get to the doing, let us delight. Let us delight in that. Let us delight and bring love and hope and faith, even when it's hard, to make the change that our families, our communities, and each of us so desperately want. Because every community, every country, every tribal nation is only as healthy and strong as its children and its families. So you're about to see an incredible program and just a straight shot of inspiration and ideas. And as you take it in, let it take you. Because the good news is, in this sometimes challenging world, is there is an overflowing abundance of values-based leadership, of solutions, and a culture of radical collaboration. All we have to do is shine a light on it and flip the script and flip the power paradigms. So first step on that is to pass the podium. So let me pass the podium and begin to light up the stage and light up our hearts as we walk through and we embrace the ring of fire, the courage of fire, because trust me, you will be dreaming, you'll be delighting, and you'll be doing. At the end of this afternoon, join us for a barbecue, but most importantly, join us in making these ideas become the norm, become the reality as fast as possible. Because in that work, in that invitation, you will find your greatest joy. Thank you.
For today's first conversation, let's give a warm welcome to 4 Ascend Fellows, starting with moderator Lorelei Vargas, Chief Community Impact Officer at Trinity Church Wall Street. She's joined by Dr. Laurie Miller-Brotman, Bezos Family Foundation Professor of Early Childhood Development at NYU Langone Health. Laura Huerta-Migas, Deputy Director at the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and Dr. Ronly Liao, Canon and Lyndia Harvey Chair in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Children's Hospital, Colorado.
Good afternoon, Aspen.
Good afternoon.
It's great to be here. So today we're talking about mental health is the new normal. And I want to start off by just sharing that in New York City, we conducted a needs assessment to really understand what are the barriers that get in the way of children and families thriving. And the number one barrier was mental health. And it was number one because as the residents and people who work and live in Lower Manhattan told us, it can happen at any stage. It can happen to you regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic background. So we are talking about mental health in this country in ways that we haven't ever before. And that's a good thing, because we're increasing awareness. We have a new young generation that has language that most of us didn't have growing up to talk about mental health. And so we're helping to kind of remove the stigma around mental health, but access continues to be a critical issue for us. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of those issues today. But the other thing I want to lift up is that the people in New York City said, can we just call it emotional well-being? Emotional well-being as a way of reframing mental health, as a way of moving away from stigma, as a way of acknowledging that we should all be emotionally well. So we're going to use some of that language today as well, and I encourage and invite all of you to use it as well if you're not already using it. So before we kind of take a deep dive in, Ron Lee, can you just get us started and do some level setting? Tell us a little bit about what the state of mental health is in the United States for our children and families.
Thank you so much, Lorelei. And I'm Ronly Liao. I've actually relocated from New York City to Colorado in the last 2 years, and I wish, thank you Coloradans here. I wish, actually, my first time to Aspen was 5 years ago on the Aspen Ideas stage, and I wish I was going to tell you something different than I said back then. Right now, in the state of Colorado, where we're sitting now, the #1 leading cause of death, beginning at age 10, is suicide. I work at the Children's Hospital in Denver. We have hospitals across the state. We regularly have 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds in our ICUs and our emergency departments who have tried to kill themselves, have made suicide plans. it is an epidemic at a national and global perspective, really, proportions. Gun violence is the #1 killer of kids over the last couple of years, whether it's homicides, accidents, suicides, community violence, domestic violence. It's guns, actually. I was recently on a transitions team for the city of Denver for public health. We're in the middle of a syndemic right now. So those in the room who are healthcare workers, and actually all of us who are living through the COVID pandemic, there's concurrent epidemics of infectious disease, of gun violence, of mental health crises, of addictions, of homelessness, right? In high school, 40% of high school students across the country pre-COVID told us that they felt persistently sad or hopeless for 2 weeks straight. They couldn't engage in school and friendships and activities, with a quarter of them considering suicide. For girls in high school, it was 60% sadness, hopelessness rates. For LGBTQ youth, it was 70%, with 1 in 5 having attempted suicide at some point in their adolescent years. It is of catastrophic proportions, and those of us, I think, working on the front lines in the mental health field or the emotional well-being field, actually all of us in the room, there's a level of urgency that I've never seen before, a level of willingness to talk about these issues that I've never seen before, a lot led by our young people, asking us to come together to find solutions that will work and help. So thanks for letting me set the stage.
Yeah, thank you, Ron Lee. So in contrast to that really kind of dark reality that we're all living through right now, I'd love to hear what your dream is. What is your dream for a country that has a robust state of emotional well-being? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? And Laura, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks, Lorelei. You know, it's interesting to be a person who is working in the field of museums and libraries, and you think, well, after what Ron Lee said, why am I here? Why do we belong here? And you know, I think we belong here because we know that connection is one of the most important and powerful antidotes to poor mental health and to feelings of isolation. These are places of gathering and togetherness. There are places where you can be alone together even, and that might be the best thing about them. And so from where we sit, we also think about, from a dream perspective, what if those safe and nurturing and enriching spaces were available to everyone, to every child, to every family? And that's something we've been talking about in our community for a long time, but we saw the proof and the confirmation of our own belief of the power of these gathering spaces during the pandemic. Because when we were in lockdown, people found those places to go to. Public gardens had their best attendance in the last 20 years during the last 2 years. Zoos and aquaria were visited by 2 million more visits over lockdown than they had been in the previous 5 years, because we need places to go, but we need them all the time. We don't just need them in crisis. So I think that's part of my dream, is that we have access to beautiful places. This is one of them, and we're blessed to be here, but not everybody can be here. And around the world, we should be looking for that too, as part of our strategy for not being reactive, but being proactive and lessening the work, Ron Lee, that you and your colleagues have to do.
Thank you, Laura. Lori, what's your dream?
My dream is that I wouldn't have notes and wouldn't need reading glasses, but here I am. My connection to mental health is deeply personal and professional. I'm a clinical child psychologist, and like most mental health professionals, I chose this career in part because of my own childhood experiences. And like most of us, my family, my very close friends, my colleagues, and truthfully, almost everybody that I know has struggled with mental health challenges. But unlike most of them, and most families out there, I experienced experienced these challenges as a child, as a daughter, as a mother, through a lot of privilege, giving me access and opportunities that most people don't have. And so my dream is for our nation to promote mental health at a population level for all children and families, but especially those who are most marginalized. My dream for our nation is that our public systems are free of structural racism and white supremacy. Small dream to have. That schools can be safe and nurturing and predictable places, both for children and for parents. I envision a nation where principals, school-based mental health professionals, too few of them out there, and educators engage in professional development in experiential learning communities that emphasize the importance of family engagement and social-emotional learning. Educators would be supported to examine their own beliefs about children and families, especially those who have different lived racialized experiences than their own. Schools would treat parents as true partners and offer evidence-based, culturally responsive programs for parents facilitated by mental health professionals, where parents could learn from each other and discuss the joys and the challenges of parenting young children, and where all classrooms and home environments would be safe, nurturing, and predictable places for all children.
Thanks, Lori. Ron Lee, what's your dream?
Well, now I have glasses too, Lori, but no notes, so I will share. I recently had an opportunity, I'm on a national task force to provide strategies for the Center for Medicare and Medicaid services for the highest complexity, highest acuity youth in the country. So that we were all comers from all different states, all different backgrounds. I was one of the few healthcare providers on the task force, and we had the privilege of spending time with some of the young people from Youth Move, which is a national organization that has chapter-based organizations in every state, where young people are using their voices to really change the systems that touch their lives. And the irony is actually everything that Laura and Lori just touched on, young people said first. And we asked them the same question: what would be your dream for mental health? And they also don't like the word mental health, right? And so for your emotional well-being and thriving. Of course, it was interesting to me as a child psychiatrist, right, gone through healthcare training all the way through, that nothing they mentioned had anything to do with our traditional mental health system, right? They said, the things that help me most are my trauma coach, the healing circle in my community, right? Some of the arts programs that I've been able to be a part of, right? Also the people who care about me in my school, who know me, who know that I want to go to college and that I need help navigating that system. Some of them said, I need you guys to dismantle the structures that are perpetuating inequality and lack of equal opportunity. I need you to pay my parents and my foster parents a living wage so that I have a safe place to live and I don't have to switch homes every 3 months, right? I need you to make sure that everybody has health care coverage that also includes both mental health supports and physical health care and coverage, and that those would also cover informal sources of support that have been really valuable to me, that we'd have healthy food and access to that, that I'd feel safe in my community, that I feel like I belong and have connections, and I can find my purpose in my life, because I can't thrive if I can't survive. That's what each one of them said. Help me move from surviving to thriving, because then I can use your mental health services in your formal mental health system, right? So where is that place where mental health is health? We say that all the time, that catchphrase. If we have a kid who comes in with cancer, they don't sit in the emergency room for days, for weeks, for months, for years with nowhere or no service in sight. They get admitted right away into our cancer centers. They get treatment the next day. They're on clinical trials, right? We're fighting to save their lives, and we don't have that same level of urgency at every level of government, right? From the federal government down to your local city council. Everybody would need to have that level of urgency, and kids said, hey, let us be part of that conversation. Ask me what I need. Ask my family what we need and help us get it, right? Because without our voices in the mix, it's just people in a room trying to fix things 10 years from now when this is my life now. So it's really amazing, actually. It's a similar conversation. They would want museum and zoo and garden passes for sure, right? And local access to all of those things.
Thank you, Ron Lee. And I love that the thread in the three of these responses is about centering community voice. And that is one of the key principles of the work that we do with Ascend. So thank you all for that. Lori, I want to pivot a little bit and talk about your program, Parent Corps. So you have really successfully scaled up Parent Corps in New York City in partnership with the Department of Education. You have now taken it on the road across the country. You're implementing Parent Corps in different cities across the country. Tell us, first of all, help the audience understand what Parent Corps is, and then also tell us, what are you learning from the research you're doing as a result of all that really good work?
I will. Parent Corps is an enhancement to public pre-K programs that includes professional development for educators and leaders, for principals and directors of early childhood education centers, a program for parents of all pre-K students, and a social-emotional learning curriculum in the classroom. Over the past 7 years, we've had the opportunity to scale Parent Corps in New York City. And in fact, when I started my Ascend Fellowship as part of the second to none cohort, this was my big idea, to scale Parent Corps, an evidence-based program that I had developed 20 years earlier across New York City. So we did it. And through a citywide mayoral mental health initiative, Mike, we engaged thousands of teachers and principals in highly experiential professional development and supported more than 50 schools and centers to offer Parent Corps programs for families and children to all those in their pre-K programs. And through the generous support of several family foundations, huge shout out to the Bezos Family Foundation, we were able to rigorously evaluate impact from these services on schools and families. So we now have very strong evidence, hot off the press. It's actually not even in the press yet, so I'm sharing here really for the first time, that schools that participated in Parent Corps professional development are experienced by parents, by over 9,000 parents, contributed to our data about how are you feeling about your school community, how are you feeling about the teachers, how are you treated, and they shared that these are primarily Black and brown parents throughout New York City, that the schools with Parent Corps, and they didn't know that the schools had Parent Corps professional development, et cetera, that they saw these schools as more inclusive, respectful, and I think most importantly, trustworthy. That these schools and the teachers and the leaders changed their behaviors in ways that we're still trying to understand, but they did things that made the families feel like they could trust them. This is, I think, transformative. And we also know from years of research that children who attend pre-K programs in schools with Parent Corps have significantly better mental health outcomes over time, with 50% fewer mental health problems by second grade in terms of anxiety, depression, as well as behavior problems. So under the leadership of our new director of our National Office for Parent Corps, yay, Kayema Hamer, we are now working to scale Parent Corps throughout school districts and Head Start programs across the country. So I want to give a huge shout out to Ascend for giving life to my big idea. It's really come true, and it really is a dream come true for me, for providing seed funding for our first pilot outside of New York City, which was with another Ascend Fellow from second to none cohort. And we have scaled in Detroit across all the Head Starts with Starfish Family Services. Really proud of that beautiful work. And really for teaching me so many life lessons on value-based leadership and what it takes to share power and listen to and lift up women of color.
Thank you so much, Lori. And that is incredible. I think you deserve a round of applause for the work that you've done in leading that really important work. And I want to lift up the finding around relationships, right? When all it takes is one relationship. We know that relationships are the #1 mitigator of toxic stress and adversity. So all it takes is for a child to be connected to one caring adult, and what you're doing is building community in these centers, and that's so critically important. Laura, so we talk a lot about third spaces, and you are working closely with museums and libraries. Tell us what the role of museums and libraries, what is the role around emotional well-being?
So, they really are, or aspire to be, these places of both connection and service. How people can connect to humanity. People think that museums are about the things in museums. There are museums without things, but that's what we think about. But really those things are just a way to teach us about ourselves, and they really are sort of temples to humanity and what we're able to understand and discover and create. And so as these third spaces, right? Home is your first space. Institutions like schools, like hospitals, like these formal systems, those are second spaces. And so third spaces are these shared community spaces. And they are these places of social interaction and civic engagement and finding our power as individuals that are part of a complex ecosystem. And so again, thinking about how they can be mitigators and positive environments for good person-to-person relationships is what we're hoping to be. And one initiative that we're a part of that helps museums leverage that is our Museums for All program, which is really a campaign that invites museums, it's all voluntary, invites museums to offer free and reduced admission to people who receive SNAP benefits. So people who are experiencing food insecurity, which we know is part of that safety, toxic stress system. And so this allows museums to extend an invitation to people with disabilities, families, seniors, people who we know are at risk every day for not living a healthy life. And there was a real question about whether this would be a valid and valued and valuable approach. And well, here's what it turns out is that museums have signed on. We have over 1,200 museums in, and it's a year-round process. It also asks them to show up authentically, so they don't get to determine when those people are invited. They are invited always. The moment the doors open on every single day they are open, Museums for All folks are invited, and just like military folks, like teacher discounts, they are a valuable visitor. And so we've had 1,200 museums come on, and we've had more than 7 million visits to museums by people who receive SNAP benefits. And we're starting to see the change in relationship at the ground level, that there are testimonials left by parents who say, "Thank you for letting me give this." I always get emotional, sorry, I'll breathe through it. To my child who I know is suffering because I cannot provide the stability that they want, but this is a place that makes me feel like a good parent because I can bring them here to the Field Museum, or I can bring them to, the Children's Museum of Houston or the Met. We have incredible institutions that are powerful places. So all that to say is, this is one example, but it's just proof that people want to be part of the world no matter what their resource availability is, and there are ways for us to reach them and extend invitation, to extend well-being to them, to raise their self-esteem, and to empower them to be proud of themselves and be powerful parents, aunts, friends, and allies, if we think about leveraging our spaces.
Thank you so much, Laura. That is so powerful. And as I'm listening to you speaking, I'm thinking about I had a conversation recently with folks at the New Jersey Partnership for the Arts, and they got a grant recently to begin to show evidence that access to the arts actually helps with mental health. And so they are working on that and working closely with the Office of Medicaid to illustrate that. And that's, ultimately getting that policy change is where it's at. So thank you for the work that you're doing. So to close us out really quickly, 1 minute for each of you or thereabouts. Tell me, and Ron Lee, we'll start with you here. Share something with all of us about something new that you've learned around joy and thriving for children and families. Just a nugget, share something with us.
All right, in a nugget then. So my area of study is trauma and resiliency in children and families. And there's a quote that I love in the resilience literature that relationships lie at the roots of resilience. And now I feel it's the same, actually, that relationships lie as the soil, the roots, the sun, the water for joy and thriving for kids and families for many generations to come. So that's my nugget. And her son cooked for Beyonce last night, so I just want to say that's joyful to me. I'm just going to put that in there. Sorry.
Thanks, Ron Lee. Lori.
All right, this one I'll do without notes. I would say it's sort of amazing and joyful to me to know that systemic change is possible. It is possible to disrupt racism, systemic racism, and address white supremacy in the largest school system in the country. And we did that, and I think that, as Ann Mosley, I believe, Ann, I'm going to attribute this to you, said during our fellowship, something that I learned was an aha moment, like these systems are just people. And people can change. Change develops with relationships and trust. And if we can just do that and disrupt white supremacy at every turn, we can move mountains so that parents can just appreciate the joy and love that they have for their children and help their own children to thrive.
Thank you so much, Lori. Laura?
I think for me, that nugget is the pivot that you opened up for us, Lorelei, at the beginning around well-being, because I think that it invites more of us to be a part of it. When we talk about mental health, that feels like somebody else's job. And when we talk about well-being, it's part of all of our jobs. And it allows, we've said joy so much. In our prep, we didn't talk about joy this much, but we're talking a lot about joy. And I think that's just an important thing that I'm carrying with me from our conversations today.
I want to thank the three of you, Ron Lee, Lori, Laura. You guys are rock stars. You're doing the work. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you.
Next up, please welcome moderator Jillian White of Capital B News. With Ascend Fellows, Melvin Carter, Mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, and Layla Zayden, President and CEO of the Millennial Action Project.
Good afternoon. So I don't know if you all could see us dancing off stage, but we're very hyped. We're very excited to be here, so I hope you guys can match that energy, even on this rainy, slightly cold day. So I want to start out with the title of this session and what we talked about when we were coming up with it. So we're talking about civic engagement, but we were really talking about what does civic engagement look like in the future? What does civic engagement mean to people? I think in the past it's had a really kind of not inclusive definition. People think about it a lot and they think about voting really specifically, or lots of other things that many people in our communities cannot participate in or don't participate in for lots of different reasons. So I guess that's why we came up with civic imagination. You know, we're in our dream moment, right, for the afternoon, and what we're doing is we're dreaming a different future for ourselves. We're dreaming about what civic engagement that is inclusive, that actually moves the needle, that people want to participate in, that people feel visible in. What does that look like? So part of this is me vamping for time to give Melvin and Layla some time to think about this, because now I'm going to ask them what that looks like. What is it? And Layla, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation and to be alongside the mayor. And I love that intro, that people just automatically equate democracy and voting, or civic engagement and elections. And I think it's so much more than that, especially when you think about the history of this country, right? African Americans didn't get the right to vote until 1870, women 1920. A lot of young people today who are really civically engaged are under the age of 18 and can't vote. And so you have to disentangle what is it that they're doing if it's not voting. And you start to see a theme of leadership, right? How are they showing up in their community? How are they feeling a sense of responsibility to something that is bigger than themselves? You see these individuals asking, you know, what do I owe other people? What do they owe me? And am I willing to take a leap of faith that if I hold up my end of the bargain, they will too? And I think that gets us to the core of what I think civic engagement will and can look like in the future, an exciting definition where civic engagement is not who do we get elected, what are the policies we change, but that leap of faith, that idea of trust. When you define civic engagement as the activities that build trust in the places we live and work and play, I think that's a really fun and exciting and energizing way to build the communities that feel a sense of belonging, that feel a sense of leadership, and ultimately contribute to building a fabric that allows for democracy to exist.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well,
That's right. So before I ran for mayor, we spent about 2 years just in living rooms and coffee shops in our city. I was asked people kind of why are you planting your children in this community? Why are you building this business here? Like, why are you planting your career? Like, what are your dreams that you have in this city? We spent a lot of time then just bringing people together in a room. We'd have strangers walk into a room and we'd ask them all a question like, think of a happy childhood memory. And we made people like just do this like speed dating thing and tell each other their happy childhood memory and take one thing our happy childhood memory had in common. Oh, it involved adults who cared for us. Oh, it involved open space. Oh, it involved this and this and this. And we just put them on cards, and that's how we built the vision that we ended up running for when I ran for office, when I ran for mayor. I learned really two things from that process. One is that people, I think, I don't think we actually suffer from a lack of civic imagination very often. I can go to a high school, I can go to a barber shop, I can go to a backyard cookout and hear an enormous volume of civic imagination. Oftentimes, the dreams that we dare to plant in communities are just a staggering mismatch with the dreams that we dare to strive for in halls of government. So I think that's one. I frankly think that the only place that we kind of sometimes do lack a civic imagination is in the halls of government. That's ironic. The other thing that I think we learned is that I don't think people are in a space right now where they hope somebody behind the curtain is doing good things on their behalf. Mm-hmm. I think people want to have their fingerprints on something. And so that's how we've sort of built our administration. You know, we've raised the minimum wage, we've put money into affordable housing, completely rethought our infrastructure around public safety. We're at the kind of forefront of this national guaranteed income movement. Check out the movie called It's Basic. It premiered at Tribeca last month. And our signature kind of promise is this initiative called College Bound St. Paul. It starts every child born in our city with $50 in a college savings account. I love it. Thank you. I learned a lot about that from you. But I love to tell mothers in our community, if you don't want your child to have a college savings account, there's paperwork to fill out, because we really mean every child. But people always, whenever we do something new, people always ask, how'd you think of that? And it's always funny to me, because the truth is, I didn't. Like, we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we find new ways to tune in? How do we find new ways to listen to people, whether that's our frontline staff or whether that's the community that we serve? And there are no shortage of ideas from folks on how the city government can be more relevant in their lives. As we talk about democracy, we spend a lot of time, the way I think about it, talking about making democracy function, which is the election laws and things like that. I don't think we spend nearly enough time talking about how to make democracy work, which means making this system actually make people's lives a little bit better and make it easier to feed their children.
Yeah. We're going to come back to that.
That's
So,
right.
Taylor, when we talk about the ways that we envision civic engagement, when we think about the future, the democracy that we want, what are the things that we want to count? What are the things that we want to bolster in our communities for people to be able to do, to have those footprints, to have those fingerprints, not footprints, we're not using our feet, to have those fingerprints on all of the work that is being done that should be coming back to them and making their lives better?
Is this one for me?
Yeah, that one's for you.
Well, so what I was going to say, actually, just on that point of making democracy deliver, I think we feel like it's not possible because there's so many barriers. There's so many sort of structural things that are holding us back from actually getting the change that we wish that we could see. And that's not true. There are people like you. There are people like the 1,600 young elected officials who have been part of my programming at Millennial Action Project, who are doing innovative work, who are listening to their constituents, who are asking them, what do you need, and how can I find a way to work within the system as it exists to build towards that vision, to deliver it today, to actually get some cool stuff done in service of our communities, our families. And I think for me, that question about what is it that we want, I think people want to see something hopeful, right? They want to see a path forward out of a feeling of exhaustion, that we're not dreaming, we're just like reacting, we're just sort of treading water. And what gives me a lot of hope is the fact that over the past 2 years, compared to 2020 to 2022, we've seen a 170% increase in Gen Zers at the state level in elected office. 170% increase. A third of members of Congress who are millennials so we've increased by a third the number of millennials in Congress. And I think that question of, wow, our democracy kind of looks like really uninspired and like on fire, and yet a generation of leaders are running towards that. They feel a sense of agency. They don't think there's somebody behind the curtain who's pulling the strings for them. They're actually saying, you know what, I have some pretty good ideas, and if not me, then who? Let me run. And we're seeing this growth of young people step into office. The other thing that I'll note, just from a hope standpoint, is what does it matter that young people are running if they're not actually sort of getting things done, right?
That's right.
So let's look at the numbers. We're about 1/5 of elected officials are young, so like 45 years and under, which I think maybe, is generous. Yeah.
Come on, high five.
Yeah, we got you. So
Back in
one
the
in
game.
5, we're underrepresented. 1 in 3 pieces of bipartisan legislation at the state level is authored by a young person. And so we've got these two things. We've got young, creative people running towards our institutions, towards our democracy with great ideas. Yeah. Then we've got these effective instincts. They're actually getting things done. I'm not just saying that. Look at the numbers. And that should give us a lot of inspiration, a lot of hope, a lot of permission to dream about the things that we want, because we're sending in fresh legs every day, and they just need us to know that we're looking and that we've got their back and we celebrate them.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Malvin, what gives you hope?
The people I talk to every day. Literally, the people I talk to every day, and when I engage them, my wife and I joke that, particularly during the pandemic, we got interpersonal interactions taken from us. And if you just sit on Twitter, you'll be convinced that any city on the planet is just going to hell in a handbag, right? And then you go out in the real world and talk to people at a coffee shop and realize, hey, some cool things are really happening here still. And so I get a lot of hope from the people who I engage every single day. I get a lot of hope from the people who are willing to put their trust in city government, willing to put their trust in their mayor. And to the point that you're just making, I think that's a really incredible point and a really important point that you're making, because it shifts maybe the topic of this discussion from civic imagination to like an old model of like leadership fragility that we have to move away from, right? Like we've seen this model of leadership that the leader has to be the smartest person and the be-all, end-all for everybody, and has to have the best ideas and have to be the most creative. And the millennials created the concept of crowdsourcing, right? One of my mentors when I got elected told me, hey, listen, I got two things to tell you. There's bad news and good news. I said, give me the bad news first. He says, listen, there is not one person in this city of 300,000 people who knows everything that you need to know to run this city. I was like, okay, well, what's the good news? So there's 300,000 people in this city who know everything you need to know to run this city. And that's an important way of, I think, looking at it. But a lot of times when we do things like we do, every member of my cabinet, we've hired through what we call our community hiring panels. And when we first launched that, like, people are all over Twitter saying, that's not leadership, you have to make the decision, right? Which is just not my definition of leadership. But it's the opposite of what we're kind of used to. And that, I think, getting away from that fragile model toward those younger folks who are willing to ask each other, who are willing to have their minds change, who are willing to be wrong and learn something tomorrow that they didn't know yesterday, is really important.
Right. You know, I think one of the things that happens, one of the things that we hear a lot when we talk to people from our newsroom, and we say, why aren't you out there voting? Why aren't you out there engaging in your community? Why aren't you out there doing all these things? And a lot of them have mis and disinformation about how their ideas can actually become policy. They have mis and disinformation about how successful young people in politics are being, and that they're actually getting the needle moved. Right. So, as journalists, that's something that we're trying to combat. I think also I'm in DC. I know some of you are too. The messaging in DC is, bipartisanship is dead, nothing ever gets done because no one can agree, blah, 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 which has been the messaging for, I don't know, when was Obama's first term, second term? It's been going on forever. And I think that is one of the things that we hear a ton about why people are kind of trying to push aside and not necessarily engage in a way that we would want them to. So I'm wondering, I both feel exhausted by this question, but also get it all the time, so I'm putting it to y'all. How do y'all think about talking to people about building bridges to get things done in this era where sometimes, the other side is not a side that is rational, is not a side that is necessarily doing anything that we would want to do, but like, how do you have that conversation about what building bridges looks like?
Listen, Anne said earlier in her opening remarks, she used the term radical collaboration, and I love that. I love that. We should talk about co-creating solutions in a way that's exciting and that gets people energized. I think the word bipartisan actually has a lot of baggage attached to it, and people don't necessarily see that as desirable. They see it as maybe watered down or not getting the full sort of creativity that's possible when two people with different sets of information come together to share that and co-create and build something beautiful and new and innovative. And I think it's really hard to explain that actually to people. I think you have to show it. I kind of alluded to this earlier. I run an organization called Millennial Action Project. We're the largest cross-partisan network of young elected officials in this country. And in 2013, we had a super simple organizing strategy, which is, what if as all these young people are stepping into elected office, we help them connect and build relationships, not along partisan lines, but along a generational identity. And that simple question helped us launch something called the Future Caucus, which is for anyone under the age of 45, Democrats, Republicans, and it helped them, like a lot of us, feel like they had peers in this job that, from everything they'd seen, in the news or on the campaign trail, felt like was going to be a really toxic work environment. They were going to be, unable to get a lot of things done, and to have sort of a network of peers is incredibly energizing. It creates a permission structure to believe, to imagine, to see other people as complicated, and in those complications, discover opportunities to actually get something done, right? It comes back to this word of trust. It helps build trust. And then it starts opening up your imagination. What can we work on? maybe if we disagree on 70% of things, there's a 30% bucket where we can get started. And then you start showing people like what's happening in that 30%. What are the things that you can go back to your communities and say, look what we got done for you. Look at the maternal health bill that we were able to pass in a bipartisan way. Look at the bail reform we were able to pass in a bipartisan way. In Arkansas, our Future Caucus in Arkansas, just a couple weeks ago had a press conference where they announced 39 bills that they passed together in a bipartisan way just last year. And I think you start to beat the drum of, this isn't just an idea, this isn't just an imagination, this is happening now. And the fact that it is something that people can see helps them believe that it is possible to grow and to be real. I think the last thing I'll say is, we kind of have to think about it like a gym. Like you can think about like the Future Caucus or these spaces where we're bringing people together, we're building bridges as like a democracy gym where you're building the muscle memory and you're getting stronger and you're getting good at doing things that feel really hard right now. And I think, again, the more that you can show people that it's possible, it's like talk is cheap, but when you put those people up, you have them talk about the things that they've gotten done, the people who they've impacted, the lives that they've changed. I think it starts to re-inspire people and give them a path to, to imagine again.
Yeah, sure. I think as a simple statement, if you want a cycle to break, you have to break a cycle, right? So when we do events, every time we do an event, whatever it is, we sort of think of it in 3 phases. We want people to hear from me, we want me to hear from people, we want people to hear from each other. And I always tell people, like, the rent that you pay for the mayor to listen to you is the willingness to listen to the people at your table. Same as I'll be smarter if I hear from you, and we all agree on that. You'll be smarter if you listen to each other. But I used to think we had to like sit people at the table and like force them to listen to one another. But one of the things that I think I've learned is that there's a relatively like minuscule percentage of the American population who's actually dug in on the sides that we see every time we turn on the news or every time we look at Twitter or Threads or whatever it is. And most people actually want to engage. A couple of years ago, the former president came to Minnesota, and there was this big kind of protest movement outside of and rally outside of this place where he was doing the speech. And we just felt like the problem isn't that people aren't yelling it loud enough. And so we decided to skip this protest rally, and instead the night before this speech, I just tweeted, here's where I'll be having lunch tomorrow. If you agree with my politics, come have lunch with me. If you disagree with my politics, come have lunch with me. What we didn't know at the time was that the restaurant we chose, like it could not have been a worse obstacle course to get to the restaurant we chose. It's raining that day. The restaurant we chose is in like a 1-block radius of street construction, and like 100 people walked in the room to have lunch with us, right? And it was really amazing. Some of the people who walked in to say, I love what you're doing, but it's even more amazing to see people who walked in the room and said, I don't agree with you on anything, but like this is really cool to be able to kind of engage with people. So I believe people actually want that. So my challenge to all of you guys is the next time you're in a conflict, or next time you find somebody who fully expects you not to listen to them, shock them and surprise them by actually listening to them as another human being, not as somebody who's like ideas and humanity you have to kind of, shove it back in their face, but shock them and surprise them by going first and being the one to listen to them in the way that you wish they would listen to you, and see what happens. And if we all do that, I think we could do something cool.
Definitely.
What percentage of the time do you feel like that has turned out poorly, or in a way that you felt like you could not manage or was not generative?
It's both. But at some point, like when you do that, the person is either going to be committed to like conflict, and eventually they'll just get tired and leave you and they'll walk away, or you'll find a point where it kind of moves forward. Our mantra in our office, people come to our office like angry or upset or mad or happy or glad. It's all the same thing. And I tell my staff all the time, what they're telling us is that our work matters intensely to them, and there's no greater gift that they can give us. And so when we approach people who are angry and say, hey, it means a lot to me, it helps me do my job when you come and tell me how you feel about that, it doesn't necessarily mean I'll agree with you, but it informs the way I approach the work that I do. Like I said, sometimes people just walk away and it doesn't necessarily change anything. It gives me peace that I don't have to kind of ride the roller coaster with them. But sometimes we have these like incredible moments where we're able to form allies and we're able to form partnerships and able to have somebody else walk out thinking, like, we actually made a connection.
I think people want to feel seen. People want to feel heard. And when you can give that to people, that lowers their defenses in ways that are transformative for the amount of change that you can make. I think that spirit of curiosity is probably one of the biggest tools in our toolbox to actually open people's hearts and minds to what could be possible.
That's right.
I mean, I think that's exactly right. You know, one of the first things that you learn as a journalist is that when somebody sends you an email that is really ugly, and I've gotten some ugly emails in my day, sometimes you just respond to them and you say, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way, or, oh, did you read the article? Did you read this part? And the way that they come back around like a full human being is unreal. And I think it's because people think that names that they see in the news, people they see on a podium, whatever it might be, they don't think of you as a real person. They don't think you will engage with them as a real person and that you will hear them, that you will see them. And when you do that, in my experience, 9 times out of 10, their attitude shifts.
That's right.
And that one time, like you said, just, you kind of create your distance. Melvin gave the audience a challenge. Leila, I want to know what your challenge would be to the audience.
You know, I love that idea of like, what if we just imagined that other people were also humans?
Yeah.
And I think it sounds like so basic, but like, what if?
Yeah.
So what if everybody here, just somebody who was just completely in your mind, evil, awful, dumb, whatever, like what if you just imagined that they were like a mom or a dad or a son or, like just had a bad day, whatever. So sort of like complicate them somehow in your mind. The second thing, the challenge that I would give to everyone here is 13% of all young elected officials are a part of a bipartisan group called the Millennial Action Project. They want to work together. They want to solve problems. They want to hear from you. And so my challenge is let me know how we can show up for you, how we can come to your aid, and imagine what we can get done if we work together.
Well, I think we could have this conversation all day. I'm so honored to be on the stage with y'all.
Likewise.
And thank you so much for listening.
Likewise. Thank you. Well done. Very well done.
It's feeling those great.
Which way did you go? Right back.
Next up, Jillian White of Capital B News with Dr. Joe Hobot, President and CEO of American Indian OIC. Dr. Dina Aroundham, Research Scholar at Child Trends, and Dr. Jessica Sunnyguk Ulrich, Assistant Professor at Washington State University.
Hi again. I'm so sorry, y'all are gonna be sick of me by tomorrow afternoon, but I am having such a good time, so here I am. So I am thrilled to be moderating this panel where we're gonna talk about what children need to be well, to feel grounded, to feel visible. And there's so much to be learned from Indigenous communities, from Indigenous cultures, and also so many resources that could be shared back to build capacity. So I wanted to start there. And I wanted to start with you, Dina. So you've talked about the importance of family and cultural grounding. And I think that's like a great place for us to lay the framework for this panel. Why is that so important? Why is that where you kind of center your work? And what are the learnings that can be passed on from that?
Thank you. CO Dina Aroundham Dawadoa. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation, and I'm feeling a little bit nervous to be up here today, and I'm just going to name that because I'm also going to take a second and imagine my ancestors and my relatives and my family with me, and all those virtually, I know that are sending good vibes and energy this way. This is a space that's uncomfortable because I think that the wisdom that we have in our communities is not wisdom that I uniquely hold, and I heard that in some of the panel presentations earlier today, that this is not new. A lot of what we're talking about doing is actually making space to uphold the knowledge and wisdom of our communities that's been systematically dismantled and disrupted over time and over centuries. And I think that creating a space where culture can be present and alive in the lives of our children and families, our Indigenous children and families, creates a space for healing. It creates a space for healing young people, our earliest and youngest citizens of our communities, our families. It gives Indigenous parents the opportunity to parent in ways that some of our communities have not been able to parent for generations. It creates a space for healing our Indigenous communities. We've had people who were systematically removed from our communities and didn't have the opportunity to fulfill the roles that their communities have said were important since time immemorial. They weren't able to fulfill those relational responsibilities to one another. So making space to have culture present in the lives of children and families in our Indigenous communities creates a space for healing. And that's not just healing for children, for families, for communities. It's healing for us as a nation. We have to have some of those conversations around the hard times and acknowledge that, but also lift up all of the benefits that come from recognizing and honoring that Indigenous wisdom. We're doing some work with the Tribal Early Childhood Research Center, and that's focused on early relational well-being and what are the practices that support that. We have to think about how we can measure that and use those practices to revitalize and sustain Indigenous cultures. And then the various places and systems that we can have that knowledge live in the places that touch children and families every day, from childcare to Head Start programs to the healthcare system, so that we are creating that opportunity to engage in protective and promotive cultural practices from the very earliest places of birth and pregnancy and thinking about starting a family to end-of-life care and making sure that we have those intergenerational responsibilities and roles fulfilled within our communities.
Yeah, Dina, that resonates with me so much, particularly this week. Folks who I talked to this morning know that I came here fresh from Montgomery, Alabama, where I was at the Legacy Museum. And when you said, that this healing, thinking about the ways that this country has dismantled and devalued cultural practices, family practices, for so many groups of people, particularly Indigenous people. For me, that just is resonating this week so much more after having been through that experience and thinking about all of the ways that families were separated and devalued and culture devalued, and how that plays into education, which, Joe, I want to come to you next, how that plays into education and the way that our children are educated, the way that they do or do not feel seen during their education, and what that does to them. And Joe, you've really centered so much of your work around that and thinking about the way that Indigenous practice should be and could be incorporated into that space. So can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So, Hau'omatakiwape, hello, my relatives. I am Unkpapa Lakota. My Lakota name is Shukmanatu Tankase Tokiahiaye, which means he leads like a wolf. And yes, I think that the educational experience of our youth in Indian country is really tantamount to the survival of our culture and our ways. And I think where the experience that I have had in my journey professionally and personally is that there is a disconnect with an understanding of the history of Indian peoples here in North America, particularly in relationship to public education. For us, the system was never really designed to lift us up and empower us, and in fact, it was weaponized against us. And as we are going to continue to learn, there were several thousand of our youth that were killed in these North American concentration camps that have been given this saccharine term, boarding schools. And moving forward from there into the public realm, we still don't really see the inclusion of our histories and our perspectives, let alone our cultural practices and customs present within these learning spaces. And the two questions that I often get confronted with in my work, particularly from policymakers, the first is, Why are so many Native Americans failing within public education? And we see in Minnesota, they're popping champagne corks off in the Department of Education because our graduation rates have gone north of 50% for 2 consecutive years. That's not good enough, and I believe we can do better, but I don't believe the system can do it. So my response to that first question is, they're not failing. They're making a spirit-conscious, saving decision to exit a very toxic environment that really was not intended to empower them. The second follow-up question is, then why is public education failing Native Americans? And my response to that is, from what I've learned, both personally and professionally in my own education, it was never designed to empower us. In fact, it's not failing, it's performing exactly as it was intended to perform, which really is predicated on creating kind of citizen widgets that will just plug and play and not really disrupt or create, let alone sustain, a differentiated cultural perspective. So out of that milieu came really incredible work in creating what is referred to as alternative schools that are culturally contextualized, that our customs, our practices, our perspectives are absolutely central to the overall functioning of that learning space. I happen to be a part of that in my career at American NYC in Minneapolis, but then this became something much larger, and I would like to give a shout out to the National Urban Indian Family Coalition and Executive Director Janine Kaminote, who's here, an Ascend Fellow, empowered me to connect with other alternative schools. Yeah, let's give it up for Janine. This put me on a plane to meet these other schools that were doing remarkable work. Really, when we say culturally contextualized, it is an overwhelming and indelible impression the minute you walk into the front doors that this is an Indigenous school. From the customs that are on display to what's inculcated into the curriculum to learning across generations with our elders, it is omnipresent and it is working and is yielding the results that we'd like to see. Weirdly, when you validate the culture of your base constituency, they tend to want to attend that school a little bit more frequently. And when you have good attendance, we know from a pedagogical perspective, that is the tide that all boats will rise. We did this not because we thought it'd be fun, we did it because we were really confronted with an existential crisis. Our language is absolutely critical to the expressions of our customs and our practices, and in many communities, particularly in Lakota, our fluent language speakers are shuffling off this mortal coil at a rate that is really kind of frightening. So we have an impetus and an onus to really engage in a different way of doing school. When we look back to our compatriots that are in the mainstream K-12 system, I love them, God bless them, but we don't believe that they can achieve what we can achieve through what we do in these alternative settings. These schools thought that they'd been operating in isolation, and so really we've worked to stitching together a community of practice where we can support one another, and we see it as creating the fire escapes for people to then exit en masse from the established K-12 system, which from our perspective, the Indigenous perspective, has outlived its usefulness. It's time to let it go and create something new. And that was a challenge personally because, in my career, I always leaned into that, what new reform can we do? But, we've had 20 years of disaggregated data. The achievement gap isn't going away, and I think we're all done with public education reasserting its primacy to steer the next reform movement. It's not working. We're not interested. I don't really want to give up my spirit and my energy into a fool's errand. I'd rather create and do something new. So it's been a centerpiece of my career, and it's been incredibly exciting work to be a part of it, but it is a collaborative effort. These communities are all doing it themselves simultaneously.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. Jessica, I want to bring you in. You've done so much work around relationships, and so much of what both Joe and Nina just talked about, for me, centers around relationships and feeling seen, and feeling that deep connection with people who are part of your community, who you're trying to learn from, who you're trying to live with. Can you talk a little bit about why you've centered your work there, and the importance of this for growing this community and getting resources to this community?
Yeah, thank you. So when I was entering my PhD program at University of Washington, I went in thinking that I was going to be going in to study and learn more about historical trauma and adapting that framework to the Alaska Native context. My family's originally from Kingigan, the native village of Wales. I'm a tribal citizen of Nome Eskimo community. And I worked in the child welfare system for over 10 years, and I saw so much trauma and disconnect and how the system compounded that trauma, and I wanted to do something about that. And when I went into that program, I talked to tribal leaders and I talked to elders and community members about what I was thinking of studying. And they told me, and I'm so grateful they gave me this guidance, that we know a lot about trauma. We feel it, we're experiencing it. We're grateful for all of this knowledge and wisdom that's helping us better understand all these different aspects of trauma. But what we need to know is how to be healthy and well again. How do we support well-being of our community and of our children, of our families? What does well-being mean? Like, what does it take to do that, to heal? And I'm so grateful for that. That sent me on this journey to do a literature review. I focused on Indigenous well-being, and I came across this term connectedness in one of the articles that I read, and it was defined by the People's Awakening team of Southwest Alaska as the interrelated welfare of an individual, a family, a community, and the earth. And when I came across that concept and that definition, I knew right away, I was like, this is it. This is what's missing. This is what people are not applying or understanding in these policies and practices within these systems. We are instead instilling disconnectedness. We're normalizing separation. We're not looking through the lens of a child. We're looking at through the lens of adults and, individuals or nuclear families. And we're not seeing the bigger picture view. And so I interviewed Alaska Native knowledge bearers of the child welfare system. And one of the things in my interviews I was learning about was how important it is that we have these relationships so that we can know who we are and where we come from. So who we are is not just ourselves. Who we are is also our ancestors, our family, its spirit, its culture, its future generations, it's our community, not just a place, but all the social communities that we establish with each other. And when we know who we are and where we come from, when we get anchored in that, then I feel like that's a very powerful place to be. That's where we set boundaries, that's where we come in right relationship, that's where we shed all the false beliefs that many of these systems indoctrinate us with and try to assimilate us into believing we're someone we're not, where we're dehumanized, where we get disconnected from ourselves in many ways. So they were sharing with me a lot of wisdom about what helps with reconnecting. And what helps with reconnecting, as Dina was mentioning, was that was brought up time and time again, were all of our cultural practices. And I am starting to equate culture with the term spirit. All of our spiritual practices, our language, our naming ceremonies, our dances, our songs, our traditions, our ceremonies, our prayers, our connection with this beautiful earth. Like, we have a lot of disconnect going on. And I think we're all in a moment of time of figuring out how do we reconnect? How do we resist that disconnectedness and loneliness and all of these symptoms of disconnect and heal the gaps? How do we re-bridge ourselves internally and then with each other?
Yeah. Dina, I saw you still nodding very hard to all of that. I'm just wondering if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I think that, I'm a researcher. My training is in public health, and I have the appreciation of and gratitude to have been a classroom teacher, a science teacher. I've worked in many different spaces with lots of different communities, and we have the answers. I mean, we have the answers in our communities. We just need people to make space for us to lift up those answers and put those things into practice. I think that we have cultural practices that have maybe not been as alive and well in our communities as we would like them to be. We need allies and other people to stand up with us and say that this is important, and make sure that we have the resources flowing into our communities to sustain and revitalize some of these practices that haven't been as alive and well as we would like them to be. And we need those to take care of our communities first. There is a lot of benefit that can extend to other communities, and there is a lot of lessons that can be taken into other spaces, but we have 500 plus years of being disconnected, and we need those resources in our communities to help us heal, so that those lessons can extend elsewhere. And I think it's critical that we have, 3 Native PhDs up here. That's amazing. Yep. And in my career trajectory, I feel like an emerging scholar still myself, but in the last 10 years, I've seen some amazing training programs pop up and start to train the next generation of Indigenous scholars. And I think every time a Native young person can see someone like us in front of them teaching about these things and making space for Indigenous research methodologies to be utilized in spaces like education and child welfare and public health, that just continues to create space and pave the way for them to take on the next set of challenges. And I mean, like the other panelists have said, we learn so much from our young people, and that's inspiring and gives me hope that they're just going to be able to take what we've done in our careers just to the next level. And as long as we have people standing with us and asking the questions, understanding who are the Indigenous people that live in your communities or that lived in your communities, and ask questions of why you no longer see their presence there, or if you see their presence there, how can you be a good ally and make sure that the systems that you engage with are lifting them up along the way. We need that.
So Dina actually perfectly set me up for my next question, which was, in your work, what is it that you most need, whether it's resources, understanding something else, for your work and your community to thrive? And Joe, I'm going to start with you.
We need the established systems to eat a big slice of humble pie and take a back seat and allow us to lead. I think what we find is that what we're proposing and what we've been talking about here is viewed, and oftentimes in certain circles, as very threatening to the established status quo and to the power systems that are already in place. Our teachings have led us into a mindset where we believe we are interrelated, not only amongst the human species, but with the winged nation, the four-legged nation, and the crawling nation, and along with that, Mother Earth. Their counter to that is hyper-individuality and acquisition in a materialistic fashion. We believe we have been gifted with an overwhelming abundance, not only in natural resources, but in whatever we need to support our families and thrive. They are avatars of the scarcity mindset. And we believe that success is determined in a Lakota fashion about the Teoshbe, our chosen family by extension, our community. When they are healthy and thriving, when they are all succeeding, then success has been achieved. It cannot be matched and documented by individuals going forward. So when we propose a return to our belief systems, it is incredibly threatening to the established power systems. It is countervalent to what they want us to have happening in this country. And we believe that, the other thing I would add too is we believe we are here to live in harmony with Mother Earth, that we do not have dominion over her. And anybody who's been sweating it out this past summer, I think, is starting to realize that maybe we're onto something there. And so what we need is the public, these systems, to realize that they are no longer driving this conversation anymore, nor should they be. They led us into the ditch. It's time for them to hand the keys over to somebody else. We may need them for certain things that we find fitting. There may be, techniques, applications that we would like to appropriate into the new paradigm that we are creating. But I think Dina hit it on the head. The answers, that's the good news, the answers are already out there. We have them within our constituents. And it's not just the Indigenous perspective. Communities of color throughout are all saying the same things. We want our own applications of how to do school in alignment with our views, our culture, our language. We want to be able to lift up our young people in a way that we believe is most beneficial to sustain our culture and not lose it to some dominant culture that doesn't reflect our value systems. So we're doing it out of an existential crisis. We happen to be the first ones through the wall, but there's a lot more coming with us, and we're here to help and lean into it and show the way for others to follow.
Yeah. Jessica, you talked about connectedness, but I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would name as something that you think is really, really needed to kind of move the needle and to help your community thrive.
I think my hope and prayer for all of us and for future generations is that we all know who we are and where we come from. Again, truly at the core of our being, beyond all the social constructs, beyond all the false beliefs out there. I recall my daughter's painting that she made for me that says, "Love comes from the light inside." She was teaching me how to heal my broken heart, heal the trauma and the pain. I feel like all of us, we've all experienced trauma and challenges, and each of our work on healing, on reconnecting, on knowing who we are, it has a ripple effect. And as you do your work, as I do mine, we're all going to help the collective be healthy and well. And when the collective is is healthy and well, so are we individually. So it's that reciprocal relationship. It's about coming back in right relationship again and having that relationality guide all of our work and our practices and systems and everything that we do.
Yeah. Dina?
I mean, similarly, my child inspires me. I have a son with very long, curly, beautiful hair. And I live in Oklahoma on Cherokee Nation. I live in a place where my son still gets asked a lot of questions about his hair, gets teased about it. Does he have a wig? And he's at that age, he's 8, where he's feeling like, oh, well, Mom, I don't wear that shirt unless we're going to a powwow because it says something about a powwow on it, or, you know. And so recognizing that he's 8 and we live in our tribal jurisdictional area in the state of Oklahoma on Cherokee Nation lands, and he's still confronting these things where he's not feeling like he can be who he is and who he's affirmed to be as a Cherokee and Lakota boy at home, like he can only be it in that space. I want him to feel comfortable and safe everywhere he goes and to be proud, see his language, see his community, see positive representations of him everywhere. And, you know, I need my community to stand up and do that with me. And those are Native and non-Native people alike. So yeah, that's my hope, is that he can go everywhere he wants to go and feel proud of who he is.
Yeah. You know, I'm really struck by how much the conversation we're having resonates with the conversation we just had, resonates with the readings, resonates with the conversation that happened before my 2 panels. But, you know, I'm edified because we're saying a lot of the same things, and those things are that you need to trust communities to know what they need, that the knowledge and understanding of who a community is and what they need already exists, and that we as a society just need to support each other and dismantle and disrupt. We're in the disruption section in case you guys didn't get there. The systems that exist now to give and to empower people and their communities to do the work that they need to do, to be healthy, to thrive, and to create a generation that doesn't have to go through the same traumas as the generations before them. So I just wanted to name that because I'm personally feeling very edified, and amazing work, VisionX team and Ascend team, putting that all together. Thank you so much to our panel for being here and sharing with us.
For today's final conversation, please welcome FemTech founder, writer, speaker, and maternal and infant health strategist, Kimberly Seals-Allers, Dr. Twyla Dillion, president and CEO of Health Connect One, Atia Weiss, executive director of the Burke Foundation, and Dr. Emily Miller, Brown University associate professor of obstetrics and gynecology, and Division Director of Maternal Fetal Medicine at Women and Infants Hospital.
We are aware, but we are not weary. We are woke, but we are not woeful. I started the Birthright podcast because I was deeply concerned about the doom and gloom narrative that was way too common in mainstream coverage of Black maternal health. And that, what if we could center joy as a tool for birth equity and justice? The Black Birth Joy Line is a phone number that anyone can call as a podcast extension that features 2-minute clips of joyful experiences, people actually experiencing joy in their birth times. What is possible if we center joy as our birthright? Let's listen.
Really, really empowering. And in the process of the labor, they pulled out the mirror so I could see the crowning. But that was crazy. Like, they were like, oh, there it is. And then I was like, you know, having everybody like cheering at the same time. And I'm like, what's happening? They said, there it is. Keep going, keep going. I'm like, so they pulled out the mirror and I was like, oh my God. I think I pushed like 3 times and she was out. I was listening for the baby because I didn't hear her, and when I watched the video, I could see the moment. It was like I stopped breathing, and it was just a moment, and then she cried, and then it was like, oh my God, it was everything, and then the midwife said, reach down and grab your baby, And I literally reached down and pulled her up, and it felt like a knotted rope. Like, I was like, oh my God. And I wasn't expecting that, but I was like, okay. And she was just amazing and beautiful, and like finally here, and everybody was crying. Everybody was crying.
Goosebumps. Reach down and pull your baby. You know, Emily, when we think about what gets in the way of joy, certainly mental health and emotional health comes to mind. What have you seen in terms of things that have been done, but perhaps solutions that need to be tried going forward?
Yeah, thank you. Such an honor to be here, and truly an honor to be on the stage with these amazing leaders in this space. So, you know, when I think about mental health, I think about my career path. I'm a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and to become that, I went through 4 years of medical school, 4 years of OBGYN residency, 3 years of fellowship in maternal fetal medicine, and I'll emphasize those were long years. And a lot of questions from my parents about, don't you have a job yet? Aren't you done? Is something wrong? But in those 11 years of training, to become a maternal fetal medicine doctor, I can count on one hand the number of hours of education I got on perinatal mental health. And that gap is dreadful. And then it really didn't surprise me last fall when the CDC released our maternal mortality data and said that mental health conditions are the leading contributor to maternal mortality in our country. 23% of maternal deaths are related to untreated mental health conditions, all preventable. And so the good news, and I don't want to dwell in that negative space, the good news is there's solutions, right? And it's not rocket science. It's bridging silos. Because what we do right now is we require birthing people to fragment themselves into pieces and go to this doctor or this clinician or this center. And then we wonder in this system full of gaps, full of costs, full of inequities, why people are falling through these cracks. Because our American healthcare system doesn't have cracks, it has chasms. And so my life's work is to bridge those chasms with mental health and perinatal care. My vision is to bring mental health care into the fabric of the care that we provide so that we can have emotional wellness for all birthing people. And that's not that innovative, and it's not that novel, and it's not that hard. We just need to talk together. So I do this in a system called the collaborative care model. It's a system where everyone has equitable access to expertise in perinatal mental health care. It's a system where everyone who comes into our Compass model is entered into a registry, and we hold ourselves accountable to everyone getting their symptoms into remission. So not just those that can come back in front of us, but anyone who touches into our system. We're accountable to making them feel joy again. And we do that by all sitting together. And sitting together with an MFM, a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, community health worker, sitting at a table and saying, what can we do better? This person isn't responding. How can we change their care plan to get them into health, into emotional wellness? We did this in Chicago, and it was amazing. Because as it turns out, when your healthcare system works for you, people do better. Again, it's not rocket science. We also saw that racial disparities were mitigated because when there's a systematic application of universal access, and when we're expecting everyone to respond, that's justice. And so what do you do when you create a successful system? You move across the country and do it again. And so I'm now in Rhode Island, and my dream and my commitment that I'll publicly state here is that over the next 5 years, we're gonna have Compass into every prenatal care site across Rhode Island. We're going to partner with community and make sure it gets there. Thank you. So I think the future's really bright, and I think we can get there all together. And what's great about Rhode Island, you may notice it at that kind of nugget of a state in the Northeast, you can almost point to it on a map, is that it's tiny. And it's tiny, and it can allow us to affect change because it is so small, but it allows us to develop a blueprint for what we can do in other states. And so it's a really exciting place to be, to create policy, to devise things with community, and to bring that blueprint forward to affect change nationally.
I appreciate that, Emily. And you know, one of the things that has been my mantra for years is, it's been in all my slide presentations, whatever the question, the answer's in the community, right? Whatever the question, the answer's in the community. I think that we have an idea that answers lie in lofty places and academic institutions, but the answers are in the community. And so when we look at this topic of Black birth joy, right? Centering joy, expecting joy, creating a new standard, which is joy, right? For us to not just survive, but thrive. Twyla, what are some of the community solutions that we're seeing for Black birth and joy?
Thank you, Kimberly. So what I think about when I think about community solutions is access to and liberation. My friend Leslie says that word all the time. Liberation for the birth experience that we all want for ourselves, right? Liberation, that freedom. I also think of my own birth experience, the last one. I got 4 kids, it's the last one. I had Lily during the pandemic, right? And during the pandemic, if you recognize, there was a lot of challenges getting into hospitals and having support when you're in labor. But I advocated for myself. I had a Black midwife, I had a Black doula, I had a Black backup doula, and my Black husband. We were all there together. I was induced, not what I wanted, but I'm older. Not that old though, I'm under 45. I'm older, and I needed to have her, a little bit sooner. My midwife arrived, and I was like, okay, I can get up and walk around now, because I know that helps me when I'm in labor. Got up and I walked around. In 10 minutes, anyone who's had a baby, I was transitioning. 10 minutes. Went back to the room, couldn't sit down. I was like, oh, this is interesting. They went and grabbed the midwife. The reason things moved so quickly, I know this in my bones, was because I felt comfortable because my Black midwife had arrived. She knew me. She was me, right? My doula arrived 50 minutes after the midwife. My baby arrived 30 minutes after the midwife. What does that mean? Y'all do the math. My husband was my doula. He learned from the 2 births prior how to provide counterpressure. So doulas are non-clinical professionals, right? They're folks that can come in and provide socio-emotional support, access to and referrals to social determinant of health supports, and physical comfort measures, right? They don't do all the, investigations, and they don't do nothing under the covers. They don't do that part. But they support us to feel good and comfortable while we're delivering our babies. So my husband stepped up and he provided counterpressure. And little Lily came out, all 6.5 pounds of her little tiny, loose-skinned, chicken-looking, but adorable body came out because I felt relaxed, right? I had all the things I needed in that village. My husband felt comfortable going home because, after she came out, my Black doula was there, my Black backup doula happened to be there for another birth, and my midwife was there. So we had a party in my recovery room, and my husband went home. And why did he go home? He went home because he was at ease. He had peace. He knew that I was safe. He left me in the hospital and took care of the middle 2, relieved the babysitter. I tell you this because the work that we do at Health Connect 1 is to train community-based birth workers, doulas, breastfeeding peer counselors, perinatal community health workers, the people who understand these communities inside and out. They know what the communities need because they are of the communities. They've had babies. They know the language of the community. They know what's going on each block in the community. They are trusted by the community. And as Anne likes to say, Anne, you've been quoted many times today, change moves at the pace of trust. And if you're going to be working with someone in such an intimate way, where they may see you on days that are not your best, where you're having those emotional wellness, those mental health struggles, and they're able to help get you access to things you need, trust is paramount, right? So having access to those doulas, having access to other community health workers, having access to Black birth centers, access to places and spaces that know you, that's vitally important because community has what they need. What they also need are the resources to make sure that those things are strong. Thank you.
Wow, that was really powerful. And there's been a lot of talk about midwives, a lot of talk about doulas. Thank you for explaining what they are, because some people get that confused. Please Google it.
Yes.
So we can be clear. But we know that these type of perinatal birth workers are critical. But they often, as you mentioned, Dr. DeLeon, don't have the support and resources that they need. Atia, talk to us about culturally congruent care and what are the systemic supports that this new workforce of perinatal health workers that we know are necessary, that we know improve outcomes, what do they need so that they can also thrive?
Thanks, Kimberly, and it's great to be here today. So I work at a foundation that's focused on transforming healthcare, getting better healthcare through investing in community-centered solutions and culturally congruent care, which is exactly what Twyla described. It's a team by your side. It's, if you're a patient, you're being served by people that share the same culture, the same language, the same lived experience. And all the evidence points to having better outcomes and healthcare through it. And we all know that doulas are magical. They provide comfort and education and partnerships. And I've been so honored to be working with Twyla over the last couple of years. We've been investing in the first bilingual doula program in New Jersey. And these folks are having an enormous impact. They have been lifelines, especially during COVID, where they're navigating new immigrants through very, very messy healthcare situations. One of our doulas that we work with, Teresita, shared, being a doula is a work of love. We want our families to feel respected and to never feel alone. And you know, I've been in public health for 20 years now. I have never seen better outcomes than what we see with doula cared for births. Just from the statistics, you're seeing a 70% reduction in preterm births, much lower C-sections, much higher rates of breastfeeding, and probably even more importantly, you're having the experience that Twyla had, much more satisfaction. And I am so proud that this program that we've been working on just got money through the congressional earmark process through Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman, who's championing the Momnibus. So on Thursday, we're announcing these new funds, which will be able to serve every woman in Trenton, New Jersey with a doula. So these are really, really special people. And to your point about what do they need, we need to make sure that doulas are valued by the healthcare system. We need to make sure that they're paid sustainable wages. And from lots of conversations I've had with Ron Lee and my amazing fellowship, we need to make sure that these folks, we're taking care of their mental health and well-being, because we've got to take care of the people holding our families up.
So true. And I think this idea of understanding what is necessary and then making sure that workforce has what they need to survive, which includes systems change, right? And we've been talking about joy, but how does joy exist within the same systems that Emily mentioned have chasms and things like that? So I would love for you all to talk about what is the vision for systems change that we need to actually achieve joy in birth. Twyla, you want to start?
Happily. So I believe that it's vital that the folks who are providing the support, as Atiya shared, one, yes, get the support they need for their mental health, but also don't have to face the same biases that those they serve do when they enter hospital systems, when they enter any clinical setting, when they enter any social determinant of any setting, let's put it that way. The people we train are of the community, as I said before, so a lot of the same experiences that those that they serve have, they also have. But then they still have to hold up the folks that they're supporting in the community. And what does that result in? That results in 3 to 5 years burnout. So the people who are most seasoned and have the most experience and have seen the most and can support the most aren't going to be there. Who's going to train the people? Who's going to have that legacy of that work? Who's going to pass that on? They're just not going to be there. So really being thoughtful and intentional about not just supporting the mental health of the people who, obviously we know need the support because they're the folks that are birthing the children, but also those that are going to help to make the changes different. Another important point, recognizing that doulas are part of the solution. We've been saying this a lot. Doulas are not the solution, right? And it's the same as when we talk about anything having to do with racism and bias, right? We shouldn't expect the people who are most impacted by it to solve it. But doulas enter and everyone's like, well, they can fix it. We're just going to put it all on the doulas. Let's invest in just the doulas. There are so many other issues, so many systems that need to be dismantled if the doula work is going to really have the effect that we hope that it will.
Right. We can't train doulas to go work in oppressive environments because that's not going to work either, right? Nope. And it's not fair to put point the finger at doulas as a solution for a problem they did not create, right? Yes. That has existed for years. And I think one of the things, and I would love for you to speak about this, Emily, as a physician, is that tension that can exist, right? And that culture, and how that piece is part of systems change as you see it.
Absolutely. I think our system is tragically broken. It's not working. I think we have to be honest with ourselves that we are not in any way, shape, or form meeting the outcomes that we would expect, much less joy or light in the birthing process. And so I think there's so much disruption that needs to happen in the healthcare system, and we need to be open and honest and humble about we don't have the answers. Community has the answers. We have to work together. It's not that we don't have medical expertise. It's not that we don't have the training to manage complications, but these systems changes require partnership. They also require higher levels of communication and policy change. I mean, I'm a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and I will tell you, I have 15-minute visits for prenatal care for people living with HIV, with schizoaffective disorder, experiencing homelessness. And let me tell you how much we can cover in that time. It's nothing. And so how do we restructure how we deliver healthcare so that people who need more get more? And people who need, that's the birth justice that we need, is that we can tailor the resources that are applied and not just try to apply a cookie cutter 15-minute visit to everybody.
Yeah. Atia, did you want to add about that in terms of systems change?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I really do feel we need to have is more data around the value of community doulas and peer support right now, especially to build that value with the healthcare system and frankly with obstetricians and physicians as well. So I've been really excited that through the Ascent Fellowship and Dr. Craig Garfield, I've gotten to know Emily and her work and her students at Brown University. So they're actually going to be coming in and evaluating the program in Trenton. So we'll have more data, which I think will help to continue to show the value of doulas. The other thing is, over the last couple of years, I've learned a lot more about the midwifery model of care. And midwives, as we've talked about, they're licensed clinicians. They deliver full spectrum reproductive care, and they deliver babies. And frankly, they're the standard of care basically everywhere else other than the United States. But they're only delivering 10% of births in the United States. And there are very, very few Black midwives. So I would really like to work with a coalition to figure out how do we improve the regulatory conditions for midwives? How do we make sure that they're getting paid equally at parity with physicians? How do we break down some of those educational barriers so that we'll have more pathways for them?
Yeah, and also just in terms of the historical relevance that midwives were delivering babies since the beginning of time. Like that was their job. If you look at it historically, around the turn of the century, there was a group of predominantly white male physicians who began to demonize and then criminalize midwives so that they could take over this business of birth, right? And so when birth became a medical event, got moved into a hospital when it didn't have to be in the hospital, you are not sick, right? But you are, the most women in this country give birth with a surgeon. That's a whole nother topic. But when that happened, it really led to a less quality of care. Our outcomes have not gone up. In fact, as a country, we are on par with many less developed nations, and it is, for me, the state of mothers is a lens for society, and it's not making us look very good right now, right? In terms of our maternal mortality rate nationwide, Black, white, any color, creed, or race. And so when we think about that history, we need to think about how we can undo that and to reestablish, as we've been talking about, that person-centered care, understanding those community solutions, thinking about what we need to break those cultural barriers, not just on the community side, but among physicians as well, so that they can be acceptive and receptive and welcoming to this new workforce that we know needs to happen for us to achieve birth equity and justice, right? So we've been talking a lot about joy, but our session is also about justice. So I wanted just to talk briefly a little bit about that vision. What is the path for, in your mind, to justice for birthing people? Emily, you want to start?
Yeah, I can jump in, and I just want to make sure we create space to talk about reproductive justice and what that looks like in our country, particularly at this moment. Right now we have so much legislation and so many barriers to birthing people being able to choose if and when they decide to have a family. And those obstacles are really, I see them daily. I'm in a state where I can provide abortions legally. And that's a very safe place, but I work with colleagues around the country that can't, that are having to make horrific decisions about, when is someone's life at jeopardy? What does that look like? How do I have to wait and watch someone get devastatingly sick as a physician that took an oath to do no harm, and balance that with the risk of criminalization, right? The risk that your family could be murdered in your backyard if you do a procedure and you're caught. And so that tension is real, and I just want to make sure we carve out that space, because all of us have the opportunity to advocate for reproductive justice, and we have to, because women are dying, birthing people are dying if we don't offer them these options.
And so important. And for us to expand that definition to not just the ability and the right to decide when and where you choose to have a family, but to, when you do make that choice, to survive that childbirth, to have a wonderful postpartum experience with emotional health supports, to raise your child in a community that is safe. We really have to extend that definition, because when it is often narrowly defined, there's a whole spectrum of reproductive needs that can get ignored. Atiya, what's your vision for justice?
Yeah, I really believe that every woman should have the right to have respectful, equitable maternal care, and that they should be listened to and they should be heard. And I think a lot of times, for certain segments of the population, we have too much intervention, and that causes a lot of unnecessary procedures, and it's quite expensive to the system. And then for some people, particularly Black and brown families, they get too little intervention and are not listened to and are not heard. So I want to kind of flip the switch on that. And I think it is so important, Kimberly, what you're doing with Earth, really, really valuing each person's patient experience. And I'd love, if you'd like to take a few minutes to talk about that, it would be great. Because I think that's such an important lever as we're talking about justice.
Well, I think that it's really important that we lift up the lived experience. The Earth app is a Yelp-like tool for Black and brown women and birthing people to find and leave reviews of their OBGYNs, birthing hospitals, and pediatricians. So we crowdsource that information because we believe the community needs to inform and protect each other. And then on the back end, we turn those reviews into data to work directly with hospitals, payers, and providers. We're excited about the ways our hospital improvement plans are expanding across the country in various cities. And it's critically important that we start holding systems accountable, right? Systems change will not happen without accountability. And in our vision, birth equity and justice will not happen without transparency, right? It's that transparency that drives the accountability that pushes for systems change, and that is where we play in terms of what we do at the Earth app. So thank you, Atiya, for giving me a moment to mention that. I'm wearing my other hat today. But it is critically important that we lift up community voices, right? And that health systems are not just accountable to regulatory and other policies, they are accountable to the people that they serve. And we tell health hospital folks all the time, if the Black and brown folks in your community don't say that they feel seen, heard, and respected, you haven't done your job. You haven't fully done your job, right? There's more work to do. And so it is not just to not kill us or nearly kill us. We deserve a 5-star experience. We deserve a 5-star experience. Yes. And so we're excited about the cities that we're expanding to and the ways that our work is growing. And this is part of justice, which also include innovation, right? Technology, thinking about new platforms and tools, and bringing in new ways of thinking and other things that could help accelerate the visions that we all have. Thank you, Atiya. Twyla?
If she didn't do it, I was going to. So for me, justice is the awareness of all the things that are possible, right? So knowing in a community that may not look like the communities that we all live in, that you can have access to a doula, right? People may not even know what that is. So a huge thing that's going to be important for me over the next few years is making sure that there is more awareness in every community of what a doula does and that you deserve to have one, right? That's something that's absent, and I feel like it is unjust. But the Earth app will help with that too, because doulas also leave reviews, which I'm quite proud of.
Doulas can leave reviews on the Earth app, and it's IRT IRTH, birth, but we dropped the B for bias. So we love your support to check it out. So let's move into our call to action. You know, we are very passionate about what we do and what we work for and what we stand for. But what is it? What is your vision for mamas and birthing people across the country? What is your wish for them? Atia?
I want everyone to be listened to and heard, and I want to welcome their babies with joy and hope and immense love and community.
How about you, Emily?
Love that. I want people to not feel like they have to fragment themselves into disease states to come into care. I want our system to accept a whole birthing person and all their beauty and all their imperfections and all their joy and their families.
My wish is a feeling. I don't have any other way to put it. My wish is that every birthing person has the feeling that I had when Lily came out, right? This feeling of knowing that you are fully supported. There's nowhere you can turn or slip or fall where there's not going to be somebody there to catch you.
Yeah.
And somebody that looks like you if that's what you want.
If that's what you want.
That's important.
And my wish is, because I get to answer this question, my wish is co-liberation, right? This model that, you know, we are here to achieve birth equity and justice, not because we want to help and save people, but that we recognize that our lives are inextricably linked, right? And that you're not free if I'm not free, and I'm not free if you're not free, and that no mother will be free until all mothers are free. Thank you.
Please stay seated for a few brief but important words from James White, Senior Program Manager at Ascend.
Thank you. Can we hear one more round of applause for all of the incredible people we heard from today? You all, Ascend Fellows, you all are inspiring. Your work and your leadership are absolutely needed, and we're grateful for you all sharing that with us here this afternoon. I'm standing in between you all, food and music, so I promise you I'll be brief, but I'd like to offer just a few invitations that I took out of what we just heard from our Ascend Fellows here this afternoon. The first is an invitation to honor our connectedness, the connectedness in our bodies, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, our connectedness to one another, across differences visible and invisible, real or perceived, and connectedness to our environments, natural, communal, or institutional. Second is an invitation for representation. This is not an invitation to appropriate or to speak on behalf of people or experiences not our own. Rather, it's an invitation for us to make space in our lives and in our work for others who represent a diversity of experiences. It's about recognizing that if we are to honor our connectedness, then we have to make space for all the ways that that manifests and invite those experiences into our discourse minimally and into our hearts and our minds ideally. And finally, is an invitation to center joy in all of this, an invitation to honor that we and one another are all deserving of the joy that comes from moving beyond a state of surviving to a state of thriving. Each of us doing our parts to make the dreams that we heard up here tonight realities is one way that we can start down that path. So thank you all for being here with us in person and those of you joining us virtually. If there's someone you wish had been here to hear tonight's conversation who wasn't, this entire program will be broadcasting on Aspen Public Radio at 8 p.m. Mountain Time this evening. There's barbecue and music on the lawn for those of you here with us in person. We look forward to seeing all of you back with us tomorrow for another afternoon of ideas and inspiration. And if you can't make it here in person, please join us and tune in at aspenpublicradio.org. Thank you all.